Thanks a lot again so much for being our guest speaker this month.
Well, hello everyone. Good morning. Yeah, I am excited to speak. I'm going to try to run through um, the work based on the title of of my talk, which is Me and You, Us and Them, Here and Now. And I'm going to do it in kind of three segments, even though the work kind of all fits into that. But and what my work has a lot to do with language. It has a lot to do with sound, and it has a lot to do with being here together now. Um, and so I'm really interested in context. I'm really interested in how we find ourselves together and what is the kind of like residue of that in a way. And so for me, language and collecting people's responses to things is one of the ways that I feel that I can kind of express what it means to me to be in community. So I'm gonna share my screen now. I'm gonna begin with a project that started in 2013. It's called Fortune. And it's ongoing, and I've been doing it since 2013 in numerous places. And it basically comes from, I mean, I would say that that it began when I moved to America when I was 18 from Lebanon, and I was feeling very much like an outsider. And one day in my dorm, I pretended that I knew how to read fortunes because I felt like such a weirdo at the time, and so everybody was really into it. And years later, in 2013, I was kind of thinking about that experience, and I was thinking about what fortune telling is, and I thought of it, I thought in some way there's a kind of metaphor for being an artist. The artist is in some way kind of hawking you their wares. You put your hands out because in a way you want something from them. And there's also this question of intimacy, there's expectation, there's exchange, and there's also this idea that the artist has some kind of possibility of seeing the future or seeing through things. So I decided to become a fortune teller as a kind of performance, but since it contained labor, basically, I decided to charge for it like an actual fortune teller. So this began in 2013 at PS1. I basically, publicized it, told people, we had a sign saying, sit down and put out your hands and be quiet. So it's entirely silent. And I read a line of text for a line in the person's hands, and then they pay me and I hand them the paper. And part of what was interesting to me in this was the idea that I'm making a work for you and about you. And at the same time, it's a work, it has something also to do with the fact that I'm making work for anybody and everybody. They're still paying me, but the price point makes it possible for it to exist in the world for anyone. So in a sense, they're actually buying a work by me that's made for them. So that's uh, one aspect. I'll show you different locations that I did it. Um, there's something very quiet about because I don't speak and I don't allow other people to speak. So they're really just reading the text that they're handed, and they may not really understand it completely, but they're left, reading it in any way that they do. I took a space on the Lower East Side for 4 months, and was just a fortune teller. I don't publicize it as my name, I just sign it AD. And fortune telling is also something that's illegal in many religions, but also like in New York, it's illegal to be a fortune teller. You can be a psychic, but you can't be a fortune teller because fortune tellers are one, they can be scam artists, which I think is also a really interesting thing. There's a very skeezy, like, street-like aspect of fortune telling. You're kind of soliciting in one way. And then also what I like a lot about it is that the slightly illegal part of it, but also the part that, you know, it's really interesting to watch the bartenders come and sit down. They see fortune, they think they're coming to a fortune teller, and then they tip me. But then it's really interesting to do it in places like museums and galleries and with really wealthy collectors who don't carry $10 with them and who are a little bit, you know, suspect. But at the same time, what I like about the fortune telling model is that even the people who are most suspicious of it and don't believe it also kind of somehow believe that this person that they don't even know who's in the street soliciting money from them is going to tell them whether they're going to live or die or have 6 kids or get married or whatever, like the most intimate aspects of their life. So there's a kind of thing about it where there's the suspicion and there's also the breakdown and the opening of trust and intimacy. So I've done it in the context of my exhibition, of an exhibition of mine. And you know, I do it in numerous places, sometimes art places and sometimes not. The one time that I did it through photographs was for a public art project in Lebanon. And this this group that I've worked with, and you'll see a number of projects with them, called Temporary Art Platform. They had all these different newspapers. They had an artist work with a different newspaper, each one with a different newspaper. And so for mine, I put an ad in the newspaper one week, and I said, "Send me your hands, and I'll write your fortune." So people sent me their hands, and then I wrote their fortunes out with no name. Everything is also very anonymous because I don't speak and I don't like, it's a very quiet project. And so and then they printed it as a double-page thing in the newspaper the next week. So the people who looked at it could find their own hands and find their fortune. Then I'm going to go to a project that is an accumulation of intimacy, actually. So in 2022, I was invited to be in a show in a museum in Munich. It was called In Search of the Miraculous. And I asked people, both through email and uh, you know, open call and Instagram, you know, I just contacted strangers and friends of friends. And I asked them to tell me, I asked them the question, what do you forgive yourself for? And they sent that to me in writing. And I read it out as a number of times. So the installation, there were 3 speakers actually, so you can't see the third one. And the same audio plays from each of the speaker, and it's basically me reading people's forgivenesses, to, you know, what they forgive themselves for. So I'll play that now.
For abandoning the child within
I
me
forgive
for so
myself.
many
I forgive
years.
myself for abandoning the
for so
child
many
within me
years.
for so many
myself
years.
for being a bitch in high school.
I forgive myself for
I
being
forgive
a bitch
myself
in
for
high
being a
school.
bitch in high school. I forgive myself for forgetting how grateful
I forgive
should be
myself
for
for
everything.
forgetting how grateful I should be
I
for
forgive myself
everything.
for nothing. I forgive myself for nothing.
I forgive myself for
I forgive
nothing.
myself for nothing. I forgive myself for very little. I forgive myself for very little. I forgive myself for hurting my own mom.
I forgive myself for hurting my own mom.
I don't forgive myself for anything because I'm too young.
I don't forgive myself for anything because I'm too young.
I forgive myself for being a man.
I forgive myself for being a man.
I forgive myself
A man who
for
hasn't
being
been
a body
socialized as a man and doesn't have the body of a man.
socialized as a man. I forgive myself for
Doesn't
not
have a
being as
body
others
of a man. I forgive myself for not being as others want me to be.
Basically, for me, what was very interesting about this was the trust that people gave me. And I find that the case with so many of the works that I make. And I think it's really interesting because I think one of the things is people know that other people are participating and they know that what they share is going to be surrounded by other people. And sometimes when I voice it, it's an equalizing thing. There are times when I actually record people's voices and you'll hear some work like that. But in some cases, I just have them send me, you know, their entry written, and then I read it as with this one. And there's something very kind of, people go quite far, you know, this work is like 9 minutes long, and people got really I think very intimate with me, and there's just something quite beautiful and trusting, I feel, in that. The third thing I'm going to talk about with Me and You is this billboard project in Lebanon, also produced by the same public art foundation. And it says, Shu ilak, shu ili, which means what is yours, what is mine. And I was invited, this is 2024. I was invited by them, me and a number of artists, 10 of us actually, to make billboards, to do, they took over all these billboards in Beirut and they invited the artists to work with that. And I decided mine was going to be the last one in September of 2024, early September 2024. And I was thinking a lot about what was happening in Gaza. I was evidently, I couldn't get that out of my mind, but also just the feeling of, I grew up in the war in Lebanon, so war for me is very much my identity. And I was also thinking about Lebanon and, the factions in Lebanon, the different religions, who owns what, money, not money, class, capitalism, all of those things. And I thought, well, I'm going to just, ask that question so people drive by and they can ask themselves what's yours, what's mine. And one of the things that became very interesting to me is like when you really ask yourself that, it's fascinating because it's very hard to really answer it. And so the way that this is made is I took the material that they make billboards with and I cut it out and then stuck the pieces back on and then photographed it. So although this looks three-dimensional, it's actually flat. It's kind of made of what it's made of. And the sense of hollowness is fake, as billboards are. But so anyway, the work was supposed to go up the first week of September. I was supposed to go to Lebanon to see it. And of course, Israel, that's the time when Israel released all these pagers that blew people up and then began bombing Lebanon. So it was a very, it was a very emotional thing, obviously, and devastating. What was incredible is that the people who were running this organization found some time in between the shelling to actually put the piece up. So they actually installed it in the middle of the bombing. And then it didn't end up staying up for 2 weeks. It ended up staying up for the full 3 months, 4 months of the I won't call it conflict, of the aggression. So yeah, this is the picture of where it was, which was really meaningful to me because, I grew up not so far from here. That I got very into this idea of what is yours, what is mine. And I kept asking myself, what can that really be? And then I did a project where I asked other people, I continued to work with this idea. And then I, for a show that I did in 2025 in Dallas, a show I did called As If They Were Sure to Find Their Way, I cut this very thin microfiber paper that I've been working with, which you can see behind me here. And I cut out 6 kind of, I felt like they're either like, I don't even know if they're kind of clothing, rib cages, bodies, bones. I don't know what they are, but they're extremely soft. They're just hang. And the words on each of them is my memories, your memories, my struggle, your struggle, my shadow, your shadow, my dreams, your dreams, my silence, your silence, my freedom, your freedom. And each one of them, maybe it's hard to see, but they're kind of like the language is kind of gridded through it. I hope this image kind of shows you, but it's so extremely thin and fragile, although the paper is very strong. And this is a paper I've been working with a lot recently. It's microfiber. Yeah. So now I'll go to us and them. And thinking about what happens when the me and the you becomes the us and the them, and how that really shifts, meaning in a way. So, when there's just me, it's this sense of individuality and self. But when it becomes us, there's something about that has to do with power. It has to do with shared experience, and it changes the idea of the me. And when you turn you into them, it also changes that. It also becomes something that has to do with someone you perhaps can't relate to, you know. Them, of course, symbolizes I'm using it more to talk a little bit about the political aspect of my work and this other that has power and what is our power in the face of that. So this is the first work I'm going to talk about. It's actually from 2011, and I had been thinking about the flatness of screens and what's behind a screen. And so I decided to buy an old television, and I went through the streets of New York, asking people, just randomly walking up to people. This was when I first like public sound accumulation. And I would ask people, can I ask you a question? And if they'd say yes, I'd put the microphone in front of them and I'd say, which side are you on? And, some people answered in a relaxed, easy way. Some were really shocked by the question. What was interesting to me about it as I did it is that I had been planning to do it for quite a while. But by the time that I went into the street to do it, it was actually Occupy Wall Street. So I was in downtown Manhattan asking people, which side are you on? Not intentionally talking about the politics of it, but it was really interesting to see how people responded. And the part of it that I find most surprising always is Occupy ended while I was still making the piece. And just even a few days after they closed Zuccotti Park, when I asked people, which side are you on? They started talking about the football game, which side of the football game they were. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, like how context changes a question very quickly, like, how people's minds go to that. So also just to say, so basically, this is actually a sculpture. It's a television that has an image of a confessional screen with my face barely behind it. And the sound, this is the sound that plays from it.
Which side are you on?
Your side.
The upside. I'm with the underdogs.
Which side are you on?
For the others. The women's side.
Clearly not the majority.
Which side are you on?
It's very hard to choose right and wrong.
Not on the side of the war.
The radical.
Like, oh, I'm on the inside or the outside.
Which side are you on?
I just said there's no two sides. There's many, many voices to be heard.
Which side are you on?
The side of love.
The right side, the good side. This side or the other.
Which side are you on?
Both sides.
The right side.
That's a very big question.
This is the piece at Poto that Raffaella was talking about, and why I'm here, because Raffaella saw it and wrote to me. So in 2019, I was thinking a lot about, like, people were in the streets in Lebanon, people were in the streets in Chile, in Hong Kong. There was this kind of sense that people were, kind of rising up across the world and kind of taking things into their own hands. And so I was thinking about the Declaration of Independence, the US Declaration of Independence, which begins when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary to break the bonds. It was leaving the kingdom, leaving the UK. And so I basically took that phrase, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary, and I asked activists, artists, writers, friends, strangers, everybody I could to complete it. And then I transcribed their responses. And this is also on microfiber paper, and it's this long scroll, and you'll see closely on there. I adhered strands, so there are two layers. There's one flat layer, and then there are all these strands of text. And they kind of rise and fall, and the way we installed it is on cinder blocks. In the Poto installation, there is only that piece, but there's another not part to this, but there's another version which is just audio, and it's called Declaration. They're two separate pieces. And Declaration is me reading that entire scroll in the first person, and overlaid with the sound of people in the streets in 2019. In fact, I think one of my friends is on this call, Rania, who was in Lebanon at the time and sending me sound from the streets. So a lot of it was, and then the other part of it is my day-to-day life in New York. So you'll hear me reading this, and you'll hear these sounds, which are both my personal life and the sounds from afar.
I take a step back. I take a deep breath. I hold out my hands. I hold back my tears. I scream in the night.
I wait for the dawn.
I wait for the dawn.
I take to the streets.
I take to the streets.
I run for the hills.
I run for the hills.
I loosen my grip. I
loosen my grip. I lighten my load. I shoulder the burden. I break up the fight. I howl at the moon. I leave nothing behind. I save what I can. I mess it all up.
I tear it all down. I take what I want. I take what is mine. I give what I have. I lay down my arms. I take off my mask. I stare at the sun. I aim for the stars. I wear my heart on my sleeve.
I wonder how it got to this. I finish what someone else has started.
I finish what someone else has already started.
I wait for the tide to come in. I wait for the fear to subside. I discard the Constitution because it is an anti-democratic relic.
So the other thing I was going to say about that project is that project went up in New York in January of 2020. And by the time the show came down, there was nobody in the streets. Our closing party, there were people coughing, and people were talking about this weird thing, and it was like the very first days of COVID. So there was something about it that was really dramatic for me, because I really made the piece thinking, now that the people in the streets are in the streets, what can ever make them turn back? This will never change. So how could I have known? Yeah. I'm going to jump to another project in Lebanon, another public art project in Lebanon. I've done very, very few art projects in Lebanon. I've done very few exhibitions in Lebanon of my work. They've all been like public art projects. So this is called Shuhaida, which means what is this? And I'm going to play just a little snippet of an explanation of what it is. Basically, I was invited to go into the National Museum, which is an archaeological museum, and which was the Green Line during the war. So it was really bombed like terribly, and then it was renovated. And it's this very huge building, and a lot of people don't even know. Anyway, I'm going to play a minute of this, and it will explain it.
Was to bring people from the streets of Beirut from every part of society, people who don't generally go to the museum, or people who would never think of walking into the museum, and to give them a voice at a time when voices are being suppressed or don't have many places to go.
So we basically went into the museum. We brought people from all walks of life, and I walked around with them, and I had them speak for and about the objects in the collection. And we did it in a kind of performative way. So I would ask everybody, we had about 150 people come all in all, but they came in small groups, so they could actually, because many people didn't even know what a museum really was, because they'd never been in one. And they also, they didn't know that this building, which is why I want to show that video, is that this building, people thought it was a bank. They thought it was a lot of things. Many of them had never been into it. The other thing is, I did it only in Arabic, which is a strange thing to do, even in a place like Lebanon, because in the art world, it's like English and French, and it's not really for the people in the streets. So this audio guide was made for the people, by the people, and so it's in Arabic. I eventually ended up making a video of it. So I'm going to play a few minutes of the video that has subtitles, and you'll hear all these different voices speaking for this mask.
بفتكر اجا جيل تاني، جيل جديد هو اللي اخذني وحطني بس لحتى يفرجي للعالم الجديدة انه شو بتعمل الحرب بالانسان.
انا ما انكسرت، في حدا كسرني.
اكيد بحس حالي اني مظلوم.
حل ما انا موجودة بهيدا البلد مش حاسة حالي،
وحطوني هون بالمتحف
يعني هيك متوازنة ومستقرة.
كنت مخبى وإجت أزيفة
آمن، مش حاسة بأمان
على البيت عنا. أمي وبيي ماتوا بس أنا تشوهت، عشت مشوه.
أنا يلي بغير الطريقة يلي أنتم بتشوفوني فيها وقت اللي أنا أطلع عليكم.
خلقت
خلقان بالعيون.
أمي لبنانية بس بيي مش لبناني. أمي ما فيها تعطيني جنسية.
هلا بفتكر انا ما في احكي بقى لانه انا صرت هون بس تمثال، بس بقدر ساعد الناس من ورا شكل اللي صار من بعد الحرب.
فيني ساعد بالحكي على الاشياء اللي شفتها من قبل. كنت انا موجود من قبل، اكيد فيني خبر شو وصلت الحرب اخر شيء وشو عملت الحرب اخر شيء.
بس انا احكي هون او اتحرك لانه انا صرت هون مثل بس وجه ميت بس بلا روح وبلا جسد.
كتير خلقت من زمان وبعدني عايش بس وجهي اللي باقي مني.
عم تكذب علي؟
إيه.
هي الأميرة وهو صاحب الأثر أو الشيء.
العلاقة بين هول الأشخاص أحباب،
كانوا بيحبوا بعضهم.
هن بحسوا حالهم إنه أعلى من كل العالم.
هيئته كتير بارد وهي كمان مش قاشعيننا، هيئتهم مش شايفيننا.
ما حدا بيعرف بقلب التاني شو فيه ليفكروا علي.
ما بيعرفوني.
أكيد بكون مبسوطة أكتر منهم.
عم يطلعوا بحدا بدهم ينتقموا منه.
بيطلعوا بعيد كتير.
Happening in this project is we were trying to talk about the present. We were trying to talk about our own lives, and allowing these objects to kind of serve as as a vehicle for that was really interesting. I never told them how old the object was or what it was. We kind of forgot about all of that. What did happen in the end is we ended up making an audio guide that people can go through the museum now with this audio guide with the voices of all these people, and they can go to each of these objects and just listen to people speaking, and that can guide them through the museum. So it's like the voices of others guiding you through the museum. And I am going to talk about here and now, which is about temporality, and about time. So this this is called A Year Like Any Other. It was made in 2020. This, along with a video piece, also called A Year Like Any Other, which chronicles every single day of 2020. Basically, I wrote out something that happened on each day. I didn't specify where or when, and then each one of these is you can see it better. They're kind of life size, and I was really thinking about my body in space. Of course, I was, we were in lockdown, so I was kind of cutting through these things, making each one of them represents a month, and each one of them has all the sentences for that month, which will then again appear in the video. And you can see a little more closely. There's something about I was trying to move through the drawing. I was trying to kind of chronicle or contain that period of time. And you can see this is what it looks like a little closer. So a woman misses a train, a woman is sworn in as president. These are all things that happened on a given day. And the word I used everything starts with A, so that I'm not really specifying, where or who or when even. And this is one part of the video.
January 1, a million protesters take to the streets. January 2, a man who was making art dies. January 3, a drone strike kills a general. January 4, an invitation to an exhibition is received. January 5, a man recalls a photograph he took of a young woman once.
January 6, a prolific serial rapist is sentenced to life in prison. January 7, a stampede takes place at a general's funeral. January 8, a plane is shot down shortly after takeoff. January 9, a rare circumbinary planet is discovered. January 10, a group of friends attend an art opening. January 11, a 100-year-old tortoise retires to the wild. January 12, a volcano erupts and thousands are evacuated. January 13, a man dies in prison after a hunger strike. January 14, a contribution of $2.70 is made to a political campaign. January 15, a mutiny is quelled by armed forces. January 16, a trial to impeach a politician begins. January 17, an artist meets a friend for coffee at a former dance club. January 18, a drone strike kills 80 military personnel. January 19, a blizzard causes several deaths from hypothermia. January 20, a country honors a man who was assassinated. January 21, a country announces its first case of a virus. January 22, a report says that a massive fire has killed 1 billion animals. January 23, a city is sealed off to prevent the spread of a virus. January 24, a citywide protest calls for the withdrawal of an occupying army's troops. January 25, a photograph is taken of a rainbow arching over a building. January 26, an athlete dies in a helicopter crash. January 27, an infected man is placed in an isolation ward. January 28, a peace plan is signed by 2 corrupt politicians. January 29, an officer is charged with murder for shooting a man whose hands were cuffed. January 30, a public health emergency of international concern is declared. January 31, a kingdom and an island formally withdraw from a union. As with when in the course of human events, I'm thinking about my own life, some of the incidents that I'm relating are things that happened in my life. Some of them are personal and small, and some of them are way bigger. But I was also thinking about the way in which we say, which we call things like a year like no other. But, if you really look at every single day across the world and across history, some, things happen basically. I'm showing a lot of work from around COVID because basically, a lot of this work kind of is from the past 5-6 years. This is a work called I Will Worry for You from Dusk Till Dawn. I started making these kind of worry beads, or a kind of symbolic image of a worry bead, because they don't really function. They're made, the strings are made of paper and the beads are formed by me, so they don't move very easily on the string. But I was making them, and I was thinking about a project that would be a relay where I would walk with worry beads, and then somebody else would show up, and I would whisper a worry into their ear, one of my worries, and they would walk with my worry, and then another person would come. And I was starting this whole concept of a relay for 12 hours. I thought it would be a 12-hour relay. People were filling their names into the timesheet, and then all of a sudden, it started to be like, no, we can't get together, and no, we can't whatever. And eventually, within the 2 weeks that I was organizing it, which was going to be the end of March 2020, nobody could leave the house, nobody could do anything. So I decided to do it myself for 12 hours, from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. And I had people send me one of their worries and choose a time that I would worry for them. So I would worry for 10 to 15 minutes for each person, and they would know what time I'd be worrying. And then we live streamed it throughout the night. So I began walking at 6 p.m. and I stopped walking at 6 a.m. And during that time, people could watch me walk for them. And the worries that people gave me, I did this performance 3 times. I did it in March, then I did it in April, and then I did it in 2021 in February. And it was really interesting because the 2020 ones, the ones that people first sent me, they were really like, will we have enough, masks? And the very first questions, which were really kind of frantic and terrified. And the questions got way more existential and almost poetic as it went on, but as I did it again. But it was really interesting. I was also silent again when I do it. So you only knew that I was thinking about the person's worry, but you knew that I had your worry. on my mind while I was walking, and I was thinking about how can we shoulder each other's burdens? How can we take a little bit, give while I worry for you for 10 minutes, you can take a breather. So yeah. And I will end with this, which is a piece called What's Left of Us, which is a collaboration with a sound artist friend of mine, Friedrich Mangold, from Berlin. And basically, these are paper speakers, and the nets are also paper. And we asked people to tell us, to respond to the question, what's left of us? And again, they sent me their responses. It's a 10-minute piece, but I will play a minute of it now.
Skin and bones. Everything that's left. Will. Nothing. Love and small joys. Chaos mostly. Dust. Thistles. Energy. Unraveled exploded eyes after a stroke. Not much. We grow stronger every day. Eros and Thanatos, baby. Love. All of it. Sadness and despair. Almost nothing. The salt of our tears.
It's always interesting to me because so many of the times when I ask people questions, I'm really, like, very often I'm literally walking up to somebody in the street and asking them. So they have no idea who I am or whether to trust me or, but it's kind of interesting to me, the simplicity of many of the questions I ask, which are, I'm not trying to get to something complicated. I'm really just trying to open up a moment where we can be together, in a way that we both are aware of our common humanity. Just briefly, I will stop sharing my screen for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, now we can start with the Q&A. Thank you so much for this.